Valve Index controllers are the second generation SteamVR motion controller, where the Vive wand was the first generation. The Index controllers released mid-2019, and even 3 years later they appear to still be the best VR motion controllers. In this review, I will cover the hardware in detail and explain what they add to the gaming experience. I'll demonstrate how the finger tracking works, and I'll try to cover everything of importance, both good and bad. So first of all, who can use these? By design, they are a drop-in replacement for anyone using Vive wands. They pair exactly the same as Vive wands, with a very brief and simple pairing procedure through the SteamVR menu. These are intended to pair with certain headsets, such as the Index, but also the Vive 2016, Vive Pro and Vive Pro 2, as well as the Cosmos Elite. They are all compatible, and they pair with Valve Watchman dongles present inside those headsets, or in the case of the Cosmos Elite, present inside the Elite tracking faceplate. On this topic of compatibility, you also require base stations. We will cover this later. The controllers arrive in a nicely made box, which I store them in. If you purchase the Index full kit as opposed to just the controller pair, which I have here, you get a bigger box containing all components. The controllers themselves come with nice manuals in several languages, and 2 USB-A to C cables measuring a generous 150 centimeters. There are also lanyards. These controllers have a lot of great technology in them, and if you've seen any videos of them in action, you may have already seen the finger tracking. I think this is what most will assume to be the main point to the controllers. The controllers track your fingers with 3 methods of varying precision. Your 3 smaller fingers wrap around the grip of the controller, which uses many capacitive sensors to detect how far open or closed each individual finger is. The next type of finger tracking is from the trigger, which tracks the index finger. It is able to detect your finger from around an inch away from the trigger itself. Finally, we have the simpler single sensor face buttons. Each button on the face of the controller, even including the system button, can detect when your thumb is resting on it, but they can't track thumb movement beyond that simple on-off sensing. Some games, such as Half-Life Alyx, will adjust the in-game thumb position depending on where the real thumb rests. This also works well in Facebook's games through Revive, such as in Lone Echo, as Facebook's controllers have some of these sensors. In a later section, I will show a detailed demonstration of the finger tracking. Essential to the finger tracking, the Index controllers have special straps to keep them attached to your hands. This means that you can open your hand completely and the controllers remain attached to your hand. This allows you to more naturally interact with things. When dropping something, you simply open your hand to release it. To pick something back up, you close your hand around the controller. This kind of interaction is the best part of the controller for me. It is a very natural and immersive experience. The strap can be adjusted for hand size by moving the small piece of metal just below the faceplate of the controller. Having it lower will force your hand down the controller, keeping your thumb from extending too far over the faceplate, which would make it uncomfortable to press the lower buttons. If you have shorter thumbs, you can raise this to better reach the top buttons. I personally feel that the large setting is more of a medium in reality. When adjusting the strap, please pay careful attention to the marked up image here. You first push in the metal tab and then slide it around the faceplate, and it will lock back in at any of the 4 dots around the faceplate. To keep the controller attached to your hand, you tighten the strap at the bottom end. First push in the button and then pull or release the cord. I have wrapped the excess cord back around the controller, tied with a piece of string. This is not strictly necessary, however I was concerned that it may catch on to something, in particular the thumbstick of the opposite controller, which could then be ripped out of its socket. Each controller has 2 force sensors. One is on the grip, making it a 2-stage grip. The first stage is that you wrap your fingers around it, known as the pull stage, and the second stage is to then squeeze, known as the force stage. Games rarely ship with good bindings for the force stage, but here are two examples of good use. Boneworks uses it for weapon grip, where applying force prevents your hand from slipping as you stab with a spear, for example. Half-Life Alyx allows you to squeeze plastic bottles and aluminium cans, as well as Zen grenades and also hearts. The control you get is extremely granular, showing that it is a high-quality sensor. I'll touch on this a bit more later, but even if a game does not specifically make use of index controller features, we can to a large extent resolve this by creating custom controller bindings, and then the controllers can still give you a much better experience than the competition. The other force sensor is beneath the touchpad. Whereas Valve's previous design, the Vive wand, had a clicky button beneath the touchpad. The index controller has a force sensor and haptic click. This sensor is again quite granular. The touchpad appears quite vertical, but it does track horizontal movement. The touchpad can emulate the touchpad on a Vive wand, or it can be configured manually as a D-pad or scroll wheel with a few other options. The touchpad is intended as the natural resting place for your thumb. The thumbstick is quite small to accommodate the touchpad. Shortly after I started using the left stick, it developed a notched feeling when moving it across the center point. When this started with my left stick, my right one was fine. However, much later on, my right stick started to develop a similar feel. The reason it took longer is because I seldom use the right stick, since I do not use artificial turning. Further to this, the stick resistance varies with direction of movement and is not even consistent across both controllers. I think this is easily forgotten, and coming back to this review months later is a point I entirely forgot. The notched feel is a minor issue as the game takes your focus, but I believe the feel is actually potentiometer wear. If this belief is true, then it indicates incoming stick drift, but not necessarily in the near future. My replacement controllers both have smooth sticks. More on that later. Personally, I do agree with the use of small thumbsticks here, in terms of usability. I initially assumed that to use the thumbstick effectively and to press the other face buttons, it would be necessary to grip the controller. However, this is not the case. The sticks and buttons are usable with an open hand. In addition to the thumbstick and touchpad, each controller has an A and B button and a system button. The system button is placed out of the way of the others and is quite small and slightly recessed, which I assume is a design decision to prevent accidental clicks. The system button would be used for turning the controllers on and off, opening the Steam overlay, and enabling the room view. Surprisingly, even this button has a capacitive sensor. The A and B buttons are labelled the same on both hands, unlike the Oculus Touch controllers, which have A and B on one hand and X and Y on the other. So with index controllers you refer to them as left B, etc. For legacy bindings, the left B button is by default mapped to the Vive wand's menu button. Whilst this review is about the controllers, I also want to mention that the supported headsets we covered earlier also feature a system button on the headsets themselves as another way to access these features. The trigger stands apart from most controllers and stands with the Vive ones in being a dual stage trigger that has a physical click when it bottoms out. Competing hardware from other ecosystems is simply an analog trigger with no click at the bottom. Valve's designs are unique for doing this. The dual stage design is far superior to having no click at the bottom and feels quite nice to use. It helps you to make more precise shots and to rapid fire, as you know exactly where the actuation point is. With regular analog triggers, a weapon will fire at some random point in the middle or even at the end, and this point cannot be felt out. The lack of certainty can be frustrating. Out of the box, the majority of games do not use this feature. Curiously, Half-Life Alyx will fire a weapon before fully clicking the trigger, so Valve doesn't make use of the dual stage functionality in their own game. Even Boneworks ignores it. I'm not sure why these decisions were made. There are other games that support the dual stage triggers by default, such as Into the Radius, which has very good bindings. However, even in games without default support, we can create our own bindings that make use of this functionality. More on that later. After only a few hours of use, perhaps 5 hours, my right trigger began to squeak intermittently. This comes and goes, and I don't think it indicates any real issues. I use the Vive with deluxe audio strap, and I can hear the squeak slightly if my headphones are on and there is no sound playing, but I cannot hear this at all during actual use. If I had an Index headset with the off-ear speakers, this could be quite annoying when it occurs. The controllers are using SteamVR 2.0 tracking, an inside-out tracking system. They are compatible with both version 1 and version 2 lighthouses, also known as base stations, but note that you cannot mix generations of lighthouse. To use these controllers, you would set up your lighthouses to track them. Ideally, the lighthouses will be placed around 6 feet high and in opposing corners of your play space, ideally a square or rectangular play space with no obstructions, and angled down by around 45 degrees. Consider that version 1 lighthouses see 120 degrees both horizontally and vertically, and that version 2 lighthouses see 115 degrees vertically and 160 degrees horizontally for the current Valve manufactured Vive Pro and Index base stations, when configuring them for optimal tracked volume. Regarding the tracking technology, in brief, the controller has many sensors, which could be thought of as very simple cameras, and these sensors see lasers that are emitted by the lighthouses. They can calculate their position in 3D space based on seeing these lasers and timing them. The majority of these sensors are in the large tracking ring along the side of the controller, with a few on the faceplate. These sensors are mainly used for drift correction, and the main tracking is achieved using the inertial measurement unit inside each controller, which works but will drift over time, so the lighthouse system is used to correct that. When you set up the lighthouses, you perform a one-time place-based calibration to enable this to work. The lighthouses are essentially markers for the inside-out tracking system. Note that unlike other similar systems, base stations do not need to be connected to your computer, only to a power source. Each controller contains a rechargeable 1100 mAh battery, which in my testing lasts around 8 hours of use, potentially going 30 minutes either side of that based on usage. The controllers are charged through a USB-C port on the bottom end and are each provided with their own USB-A to C cable, each measuring a generous 150 centimeters. I assume these to be USB 2 cables. The intent is that you will plug these into the controller and to a power source such as a PC or charging plug, but no such power source is provided. The preceding kit, being the Vive 2016 kit, was equipped with a charging plug for each controller. These cables, however, are still working fine after 23 months. I use them with my Galaxy wall plugs to charge my phone and tablet, as well as the Index controllers. The controllers are advertised as fast charging. I find this to be an unrealistic description. Most standards of fast charging are substantially faster. Whilst the controllers do not have battery bars on them in the real world, they do have them inside VR. If you open the Steam overlay at any time, you can look at your controllers and see 4 dots indicating the current battery level. This is the same thing they did with the Vive ones, and it's nice to be able to see the battery level when in VR. Furthermore, If you purchase FPS VR on Steam, it will show a battery percentage for each controller. In VR, we can rebind controls using the Steam VR input system. We can usually change which button does what, change grab thresholds, and more. These controllers have the largest binding area of any motion controller. We have force-sensitive touchpads, sticks, dual-stage triggers, face buttons, dual-stage grips, and capacitive sensors on every single button. This means we can create better bindings for our games as we have more places to put them. For instance, in the forest, we can bind quick slots, allowing us to quickly change weapons without having to open the inventory. Players with other controllers cannot do this, simply because they have nowhere to put such bindings. But on index controllers, you can simply place the 4 quick slots on the 4 sides of a touchpad. There are also chords, which are combination bindings. For example, if I press south on the left touchpad and press right B at the same time, a gameplay clip is captured. There is also strong accessibility support. For example, the potential to map a global crouch button, enabling you to conveniently reach the floor without bending. Mapping these controls is a confusing process for many people, and it is optional. Though as with any game, good controls are critical to improving the experience, and this ability is a strong general advantage to PC gaming. I made a detailed bindings guide containing step-by-step examples of great bindings you can set up, such as dual-stage triggers, natural grab, the global crouch button, and more, and I recommend watching all of that video if you want to get the most out of your controllers. There's a link in the description. When switching on the controllers, your fingers should be wrapped around the grip without squeezing, and you should not be touching the touchpad. Both of these components seem to calibrate during controller startup. As well as calibrating force, the finger positions are also calibrated, though this can be altered later by individually lifting and lowering fingers a few times. I successively lift each finger from the grip, then successively place them, and do this around 3 times if I notice any finger tracking issues. Here's some demo footage from Boneworks showing what the finger tracking looks like. So you can see me slowly close each finger on the left hand, and doesn't track the full range of motion, but when the fingers are closer to the controllers, it does a really nice job. So that's just showing it slowly. In extreme case, you can see you can easily give someone the middle finger. Little Britain middle finger gesture. I knocked the controllers together, had to move them apart a bit. You can see that general gesturing is really easy. Just lift fingers. I can pick things up naturally. And here on the slide, I'm showing what it looks like when you lift fingers off of it. So you can grip it with 1 finger, 2 fingers, whatever. And Boneworks does a really nice job of showing you this. You can see that my finger above the trigger is tracked before it touches the trigger, because the trigger can sense that. I can lift fingers off of the grip it with my second hand, lift fingers off of it with that hand as well. And it looks really nice. Drop the gun naturally, pick the other one up. No button involved, just open and close the hand. I can grip the charging handle with 1 finger, 2 fingers, or 3 fingers. I can move my second hand to grip the weapon in different places, lift fingers off of it. It's all shown to you really nicely. Again with the finger on the trigger. And it's a really nice effect they've done here in this game, using the impressive hardware from the controllers. Visual finger tracking is typically a cosmetic thing that does not directly affect gameplay, but seeing natural interactions like this does make the experience more immersive. That said, you should not expect this level of attention to detail from all games that you play. The list of games that support finger tracking in any way is relatively small, though there are good titles out there. These controllers are also fully compatible with the more primitive hand gesturing used in Facebook exclusive games when running them through Revive. Whilst most games do not support the full finger tracking, we can always make use of the natural grabbing and potentially the dual stage triggers and other features, which improves the experience considerably. The natural grabbing in particular is nice, as you do not have to hold any kind of button when grabbing things, so there is no disconnect and no fatigue, and it just feels immersive. The force sensor on the grip is, outside of Half-Life Alyx, largely an accessibility setting. If you find that you are grabbing things accidentally, you can set the grip binding to require force. However, a fun example used for the grip's force sensor is to set up squeezy ketchup bottles in Cookout. The default bindings use the trigger to squeeze the bottle and release ketchup, but with index controllers, we can set up a physical squeeze instead, and this is more fun. This is covered in the bindings guide, linked in the description. The touchpads are typically extra space to create bindings. In Pavlov and H3VR, Touchpad South releases the magazine from your weapon, and this works well in all games. However, when a game is not already using it and I want to improve the bindings, I'll typically bind this touchpad as a D-pad and set a button on the north and south end, as east, center and west can be a bit more fiddly to use. In Lone Echo, you click the sticks to use thrusters. Due to concerns with thumbstick reliability when clicking them, I remapped that to the touchpads, and I do feel that the touchpad is better suited to this binding anyway. If you suffer from sweaty hands, the capacitive grip becomes difficult to use. As your palm sweats, the grip will stick to the on position, making it difficult to drop things. I worked around this by placing a piece of toilet roll between the hand and the controller, which I replace periodically. This works well, and the finger tracking still functions fully. A common complaint from users of these controllers is stick drift. This is an effect where, over time, the stick loses its ability to self-center. This means that when moving the stick and releasing it, you keep moving in-game as the stick remains off-center. I have been aware of this risk since day one, and committed to rebinding every stick click to another area to improve longevity. I did this based on a teardown I saw of the controllers. In anticipation, I also purchased a set of replacement thumbsticks. There is more detail on this in the written review. In January 2022, approximately 22 months after purchase, I noticed a slight drift on my left thumbstick. Though I had prepared myself for the fix, I first went to Steam support. They agreed to replace the controller, and the whole process from opening a ticket to receiving the replacement took 8 days, which I think is pretty good. Europe is served through a warehouse in the Netherlands, and I am in the UK. At the same time, they replaced my right controller for having a loose touchpad. This occurred at some point during the first year, when I was pressing south to release a magazine, and I heard a crack. I've not seen this complaint elsewhere. As mentioned earlier, the touchpads use force sensors. When testing the sensors, I see that in order to max them out, I would have to press very hard, and I don't think I press anywhere near that hard. I did open a ticket for this previously, and Valve did agree to a replacement, but they would not agree to sending the replacement in advance, so at the time I left it. I was aware that I had time to come back later. This time they offered an advanced replacement, but I would have accepted it either way, as my 2-year warranty was close to expiring. After my experience, I cannot even be sure that clicking the sticks poses a substantial risk regarding stick drift. If you search online, you can also find plenty of stick drift complaints with DualShock and Xbox controllers, and even some with touch controllers. The issue here is not that stick drift is possible, but that the controllers are expensive, and fixing them outside the warranty period can require soldering skills. In the next design, I would like to see a modular thumbstick. In my case, I estimate 490 hours of usage to develop stick drift. These controllers cost £259 for one pair, or £139 each. Buying a pair gets you a small discount. For the first 2 years of sale, you could not purchase single controllers, so it's good that Valve got around to rectifying that. They cost a little more than Vive ones, and they cost a lot more than the most recent Oculus Touch controllers. Delivery is included. Oculus Touch controllers are not compatible with SteamVR tracked hardware, so looking at the pricing difference like that is for people who have not yet bought into VR, and the trend has always been that SteamVR hardware is significantly more expensive than the Oculus/Facebook alternative. Personally, I thoroughly enjoy using these controllers, and I feel that they have added a lot to my experience over the Vive ones that I used in the past. I think it's difficult to justify them being worth around double what you would pay for Oculus Touch controllers in monetary terms, but I do think the index controllers are more enjoyable, and if you have the extra money to spend, I don't think you would regret getting these. Their only competition within the SteamVR ecosystem is the Vive Wand. Comparing with the Vive ones at £240 per pair for first generation controllers, or £386 per pair for second generation controllers, these index controllers seem like a no-brainer. I really don't know what HTC is thinking with their wand pricing. The only difference between the two generations is the newer tracking technology, which makes no practical difference at all unless you plan to use more than 2 base stations. HTC is charging a 61% premium just for second gen tracking, and that's a premium of £146. The index controllers are also using second gen tracking, and they do not require such an absurd price premium. You will see this absurd markup on second gen tracking across HTC's entire range, and I don't see any justification for it. Note also that first generation lighthouses are compatible with both first and second generation accessories, but second generation lighthouses are compatible only with second generation accessories. This means that second generation lighthouses are not compatible with first generation ones or the Vive 2016. There's nothing really wrong with Vive ones themselves, and if that's what you have, you will have a lot of fun with them. I played through the entirety of Boneworks with Vive ones, and although the bindings were suboptimal, a good game is a good game. Index controllers won't change that, but they do make the experience smoother, and they are certainly worth an extra £20. Looking back at the index controllers, HTC makes the price appear more reasonable. These controllers are genuinely a joy to use, and I do enjoy the reduced friction in VR, being able to interact and gesture more naturally than with other controllers. The more friction you can remove, the better you will feel when in VR, improving your immersion. The quality of the experience is very high. If you're looking at buying these or Vive ones for your VR setup, these seem like a no-brainer to me. Index controllers are more enjoyable to use, and they are more functional. My controllers did require replacements, but so far I cannot fault the warranty experience, and I don't know that their longevity is any worse than other controllers. I enjoy using them, and in the current climate, I believe I would personally choose to buy into VR with a full index kit. I hope you have found this review to be informative. If you have any feedback or queries regarding this review, please leave a comment. Good day.